Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Folks, I hope you're doing well, and we're going to have quite a show for you. We're going to have two segments here, one of which we're going to talk about, i.e. the money, follow the money, $140 million spent on the CRC, Columbia River Crossing, just trying to, if you will, put together a project to build a new bridge, okay, and what that's all about. But I think the major concern with the public now is that the fact that $140 million has been spent just on consulting, just discussing the bridge. We have nothing. It hasn't broken ground, anything of that nature. Anyway, we're going to talk to someone that has some a feel for the money, and that's the key, the money, $140 million, and we're still spending money, as I indicated before, at the rate of $2 million a month still yet, okay? So we're going to do that. That'll be the first half hour. The second half hour, we're going to talk about another very major controversial issue, and that's all the whole issue of Planned Parenthood, contraception, et cetera, and that's on the federal level. It's very political at this point in time. And why in the world are men bringing up the issue on women issues? You know what I mean? That's going to be a very interesting piece. So we're going to have a discussion on that particular issue. So stick around with us. Okay, so let's just jump right into our first guest. And we've got Tiffany Couch here with us.
You said that right.
Tiffany Couch, okay. And she's with the Equity Group. Right?
Acuity Group.
Acuity Group, okay. And basically what it amounts to, it's a CPA type of a firm, right?
We are a non-traditional CPA firm.
Non-traditional.
That's
like
right.
That.
Meaning we don't do tax returns
okay.
in our office. It's 100% forensic accounting work.
Forensic
accounting work.
I've heard that word. I've heard that forensic piece, whether it be in the death of a person, something like that. But now you've got forensic in money issues, following the money.
Well, that's right. It's following the money, and the forensic part comes into the fact that I'm often called in as an expert witness in court to testify to a judge or a jury as to what happened to other people's money, and so the forensic part kind of comes in there.
And how did you get in this business with the whole issue with the CRC?
Well, I was approached by a gentleman named David Medor. He is a private business owner in Vancouver, Washington. Mm-hmm. He owns a multinational business, international business, mm-hmm. and employs well over 100 people in Vancouver. And the way he tells it is he woke up one day and figured that he needed to help shed some light on some things in his community, and he felt like he had the resources to do that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he targeted was the Columbia River crossing. Mm-hmm. He was reading the newspaper articles and not really happy about some of the issues that were mm-hmm. coming to light. So he started asking more questions. Mm-hmm. And in asking more questions, and his basic question was, where is the money gone? What have you spent the money on? Mm-hmm. And the Columbia River Crossing Project Office gave him 724 electronic data files, mm-hmm. each having thousands of pages of data inside them. So literally, he probably had 10,000 documents sitting on a server somewhere. From the beginning. And so he called me and said, I understand you're a forensic accountant. Can you come and help me disseminate what are in these documents? And so I sat down with him and I said, well, Mr. Medor, you've asked for the wrong thing. We just need to get some accounting reports here. I said, where's the job cost report, or what kind of accounting reports do you have? He's a business owner. Mm-hmm. I'm a business owner. I said, how do you make decisions? You don't make decisions on all the data. Right. You make decisions on your financial reports. And he said, well, you're right. He said, we're having a meeting next week. Why don't you come along with me? And I said, you know what? We'll just get the financial reports. It should disseminate, where all the money is gone. And you're really not going to need me to go through the documents because the reports should support all of this data.
Okay.
And so right around April, the beginning of April last year, 2011, mm-hmm. we went to the Columbia River Crossing Project Office, just he and I. There were 7 or 8 people to meet us there at the office, and there were an additional 6 or 7 people on the phone in Olympia. Literally a dozen to 15 people there to meet just with him and I. And the first thing I asked for were documents, and they said, oh, well, wait, we're here to give you all of the data dump from our accounting system. And I said, well, I don't need all of that data. I just want an accounting report that tells me the money coming in and the money going out.
Right.
And they said, well, ma'am, we don't have that.
Don't have.
And I said, that's what I said. I said, you don't have. I said, well, how do you make decisions? How do you figure out, where you're at in the project and budget to actual and those sorts of things? And they said, it's really very difficult. We really don't have good reporting.
And they will represent what? Both states, right? The state of Oregon and Washington?
I'm not sure. The CRC project office, it's my understanding they have both Oregon DOT people and Washington DOT people sitting there. So there very well could have been a mix.
Okay.
But they were all CRC related people or Washington State accounting representatives in Olympia.
So what did they say?
They literally told me they did not have summary accounting reports for the project, that was, quote, difficult to obtain. And I said, okay, well, how do you make decisions? How do you approve invoices? Some of these very basic things. And they said it was very difficult because Oregon was paying some of the money and Washington was paying some of the money, and that they were finding it difficult to have a summary accounting report.
But if they made the statements here, Oregon had some of the money and spending it, and Washington was spending some of the money. Well, okay, well, where is that money?
Well, that's what they said, well, we gave you all of the documents to support the payments. And I said, I understand that you gave me 10,000 documents, but what do those $10,000 documents mean? And Mr. Medor said, you gave us a lot of data, but all of that data does not give us any information. And they said, well, that's why we're here today. We would like to give you a data dump from our accounting system that basically supports all the checks written on the CRC. So they literally gave me a native Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that had tens of thousands of lines. And it was my job to basically take that and figure out the payments that the state of Washington made by vendor for the CRC project. So I disseminated their accounting.
You mean you went through that whole piece, basically?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Because they didn't have a report to give me. So I had to create a report to try and figure out who got paid what dollar amount on this project.
Well, should that not be a part and parcel of the process, if you will? When money, when money is dispensed or whatever to any contractors alike.
In April of 2011, they had already spent $108 million.
$108 million.
And so my concern was, how in the world can you not have a basic accounting report to justify $108 million of expenditures? QuickBooks, something most small business can go out and buy for $300, could have handled this project. It should not have been difficult to be able to have something meaningful.
So I'll take it this way as a layperson. I would say, okay, fine. You got the documents now. You've gone through and etc. Now you can tell the story, so to speak, I guess.
I have, to some degree, been able to tell the story.
Okay. So let's say first day, okay, before when the idea came about, right? The idea, who basically brought up the idea about the possibility that we needed a bridge across, a new bridge, if you will, across the Columbia River?
That's a good question. There's some debate about that. As to the reasoning behind it. I wasn't there. I didn't even live here then. But I do know that from day one, which was 2000,
years back,
1999, 2000, they started studying the corridor. They started studying I-5, 205. They started studying options. We have all of these studies from 1999 to 2004.
And they, ODOT and WashDOT.
ODOT and WashDOT. Okay. It looked like a lot of those were joint projects between the two.
That's what they normally do with those projects, right?
And these reports clearly show that there were options for a third bridge or multiple bridges. Their own studies clearly show that I-5 was full and 205 was full or close to being full, and that they needed to look at other, like a third bridge option. And so it's really unclear why, when you read all of these studies between 1999 and 2004, when the actual Columbia River crossing project started, they basically went to an I-5, how are we going to fix an I-5 project, instead of referring to some of these earlier studies.
Okay, so my thought was, again, the first discussions was at ODOT and WashDOT, and they were communicating with one another because they supposedly, and then all of a sudden someone says, okay, fine, we need to do this, and so what the process is. Let's basically get some idea, some rendering, if you will, of what this might look like, right?
I would say that's true. And so in late 2004, early 2005, the Columbia River Crossing Project Office was formed as a bi-state agreement between Oregon Department of Transportation and Washington Department of Transportation. They literally set up shop in Vancouver. They have an office in Vancouver. And they went to work finding an engineer who could do all of the environmental impact studies that are required before you can actually build your project.
And who were the governors at that time, if you don't mind? You remember?
You know, I really don't know.
Okay. So somebody had to give somebody the okay,
I'm sure,
right?
you know, probably was Gary Locke back then. And somebody had to have given somebody the authorization for this to happen.
Think, right? Or if
That's
not,
correct.
that WashDOT, NODOT.
That's right. Well, I have the agreement between WashDOT and NODOT, but how far up the chain that went, I don't know.
Okay, let me ask the first thing right off the bat. Who got the first check?
I can tell you the answer.
Who got the first check?
The first check was written from Oregon Department of Transportation to David Evans and Associates, actually on an earlier project.
Wow.
But it came out of ODOT, the CRC sort of pot of money for a traffic study that David Evans and Associates did. At least that's what it looks like. It's
how much was that check? Any idea?
Oh, I could tell you it's probably
about
$500,000.
About $20,000?
$500,000.
20 what?
$500,000.
$500,000. Okay, all right, that's the first check. That's a lot of money. Okay, now why don't you just get right in. Now, who are some of the other? I noticed an article in Oregonian some time ago that talked to some of the people who were getting those checks, some notables, if you will.
Sure.
I noted one of Earl Blumenauer's, Congressman Blumenauer's person was getting some money as a consultant. I don't know whether the person was working at during that particular time or whatever, but I would have thought that our delegation would have at least been, i.e., contacted and told, if you will, especially in his district, in that particular district.
Well, I can tell you that through December 31st of 2011, a total of $132 million was spent on this project. Okay?
Wow.
93 million and some change has gone to one vendor, and that vendor is David Evans and Associates. So 93 million out of 132 million has gone to one vendor.
To do what?
I don't want to say he, that firm has been tasked with doing the environmental impact statement process. Basically, doing lots of studies on traffic and in the environment and what kind of bridge are we going to build, and having public meetings that is required by the federal government in order to get the project actually started.
Have you compared that amount of money to one contract in regards to, i.e., as you say, environmental studies, et cetera, and going out to meetings, and et cetera, to other entities like this? Have you compared that?
I haven't compared that. I will tell you that Washington State Department of Transportation indicates that they're within a normal benchmarking range for other projects this size. What's interesting is that when they originally went out and asked for a contractor to do this project, they said that they thought it would be in excess of 20 million. And so to see that their consultant and their sort of budget was 20 million, and they're approaching the 140, 150 million dollar range, one has to wonder, why didn't we budget for the full cost earlier on? Why do we keep incrementally adding funds to fund this continued environmental process?
And to date, Evans still is the IE.
Yes.
Was this a competitive bid process when they first awarded the contract?
David Evans and Associates was the only firm to submit a bid.
The only firm?
Yes, sir.
Gee, I've never known that to be the fact. I mean, there are many other engineering firms comparable to David Evans, isn't
Yes, there are.
We're being quiet. Is there something?
It's a red flag.
Gee whiz.
When you have a large public project like this.
That kind of money.
It is a red flag not to see a competitive bidding process. And now the state of Washington, which was the state that called for the bids to come in, is a state whereby engineering projects are basically submitted based on your qualifications. But literally, David Evans and Associates is not the only engineering firm in the world or the country to have the qualifications.
Sole source type.
Right. And so it's very unclear why that was the way it was.
Okay, so the money now, it's going into the state of Oregon and Washington, right?
That's right.
And then it goes to the contract. Well, I take it. So then the money comes in there, and then they send the money to David Evans, their representative, so to speak, right?
That's correct. So the DOTs each allocate a certain portion of their budgets to the Columbia River crossing. That money, if it's in Oregon, it goes over to the state of Washington, the Department of Transportation, who is sort of the bank.
Right.
Okay. And then as David Evans or any other contractor submit an invoice for their work, the bank, the Washington State Department of Transportation, writes the check to the vendor.
Wow. Well, now, does David Evans goes out with bidders, or is it another sole source kind of a deal?
David Evans has lots of subcontractors on the project.
And is it an open bid process?
I have no idea.
Wow. And what about when the invoice goes back to the state? Do they do anything noticeable? Like
there is a
what are you going to be doing for the money? Who's on the state side that says, okay, fine, we're going to evaluate to make sure that we're getting, if you will, our money's worth from the taxpayer standpoint?
There does seem to be an approval process by invoice.
By invoice. Who does that?
There's a whole host of project managers that have signatures, and there's emails going back and forth. So there does appear to be an approval process for paying the invoices. What is not clear is the fact that we have tens of millions of dollars in cost overruns in terms of change orders, in terms of time. You know, we say we're going to get something done in December of 2010, and all of a sudden we now have a change order that says we are not going to get it done until December 2012, and oh, by the way, we need $20 more million. What's not clear is how these gross cost overruns are approved. That's what's unclear. There are approvals of invoices. But the bigger issue here is we say we have a contract for $50 million to do the environmental impact statement process. 3 years later, we have a change order that says we need $45 million more dollars. But we're not going to change the scope of work. We're going to do the same work we said we were going to do for $50 million, but we actually need $95 million to do that. And then 2 years later, we get $10 more million, again, without changing the scope of work. So it's kind of like a contractor saying, you know, I'm going to come into your house. I'm going to build your kitchen for $50,000. He gets in, he starts building your kitchen for $50,000. You get the granite, you get the nice appliances, and then he says, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $95,000 to build the same kitchen. I'm not going to give you better stuff. I just need more money. And
so what I'm hearing from a contractor, being I've been in the business too to a certain degree, normally there's a kind of something like a cost plus.
Yeah, like a cost plus or a contract. Fixed price, or you know, they do have change orders that they go through a process of doing a change order, but
what happened to the original contract? I'm just saying, if you want to do something for $50 million, it's going to take $50 million bucks. That's what I'm going to pay you.
That's right.
I didn't hate this.
What I'm being told by the DOTS is that they didn't have the funding for it at the time, so they just write the contract to get it started.
Open-ended, just to get it started. So it could have been $200 million.
It probably should have been, because that's what the cost is going to be. And so instead of budgeting for the actual cost at the time we know it, we kind of get it started, and then wait for the funding to come in. Instead of budgeting for what we know it's going to cost. That's number one. Number two is the sheer number of change orders, the sheer number of changes in the dates as far as what we're going to deliver to the state of Washington and Oregon on this project is grossly out of line with what they propose initially. And not just once, but gosh, I have 10 different task orders here that are every single one over time and over budget in terms of dollars, and it doesn't make any sense.
Wow. You know, we were also looking at the listing of some of the recipients of these.
Yes.
You mind maybe just going over some of those? Yeah, let's just go over some of those recipients.
90 of the $132 million, I already told you $93 million has gone to the general contractor, David Evans. We have $20 million that we do not have a vendor name for. So the information in Washington State's accounting software is blank. And what they tell me is that, well, those are funds that were spent in other areas, and we transferred those expenditures into the CRC pool of money. And when they've transferred those expenditures in, it kind of, we didn't bring in with it the source data or the information of who did we pay Mr. Broussard,
Yeah.
did we pay Tiffany Couch.
Right.
So there's $20 million there that we don't know where the money went. Some of it's going to be payroll for Washington State employees. I suspect more of it went to David Evans and some rent, because I can kind of see some of the data.
Rent. He picked up $90-some million bucks.
They pay 30-something thousand, about $33,000 a month in rent for the space they have in Vancouver.
$33,000 a month.
A month for rent.
Could have bought the building for that. But anyway, it's a late.
So some of the other recipients, couple of bigger
give me some.
Contractors, HDR Engineering.
HDR.
HDR Engineering.
That's here in the Portland area. It's in the Portland area, here, Northeast Portland.
TriMet. Let's see.
TriMet. What's
TriMet's received $2.1 million.
For what?
Likely payroll. Reimbursement for payroll. I don't know if there's other. I haven't looked through all of their invoices yet. We've spent a lot of time with David Evans, and we haven't gotten all the invoices we've asked for. But TriMet, $2 million. $2
million, okay.
Rent, they've paid $2.2 million in rent, which equates to they're paying about $30,000 a month.
For the CRC's office?
Yes, sir.
$33,000 a month.
$33,000 a month in rent for the office space.
Well, ODOT has offices here.
So WashDOT has an empty building,
yes.
or a partially empty building in Vancouver.
Jesus. Okay.
There's some others. Patricia McCaig is one that I know. Yes, Patricia McCaig was the governor's campaign manager, and she has been a consultant to the CRC. I believe she may or may not be now an employee of David Evans, but her marketing or consulting firm has received about $131,000.
That's what she was paid?
Yes.
As a consultant?
I'd have to look it up.
What about some others? What was this one about the Congressman Blumenauer? Was he former chief of staff or something?
Well, I would have to know the name.
Yeah, McGrath or something?
Oh, McGrath.
Yeah, something like that.
Mark Graff, yep.
Mark Graff.
Hold on, I know that one's in here.
Was he still working for the congressman at that point in time, or was he?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would have to look up the detail.
How long was this ago? Because I can remember when at one of the presentations that at Hayden Island, I noticed he was there as a consultant. I just thought he was there as a representative of the congressman's office, but maybe he was being paid at the time.
He might have been being paid. What I would have to do is go look for the detail.
Why don't you put that one out? Check that one out.
Okay.
Aspect of it. Okay, so we got about another good 8 minutes, because we're going to follow up with this, by the way.
Okay.
This is not just this is the last one. You'll be coming back, right? Okay.
Yes.
Now, where are we today?
Well, today, the project office has received what's called the Record of Decision, which means all of those environmental studies have been completed, and the federal government said, you have our blessing in order to move forward with the project. It's my understanding that there is a real gray area as far as funding, how much money is going to be able to come from the feds, and then each state, the state of Oregon and the state of Washington, is required to come up with $500 million each, and then of course there's the tolling piece. So I know that there's some uncertainty about the funding of the project. However, the project office is still there. They still are getting paid about $2 million a month. It's still
being paid.
Yes.
$2 million a month.
That's how much money Washington State DOT is paying to fund this, whether in payroll costs or rent to David Evans and Associates.
But this latest rendering, what they had said, they had approved the bridge, et cetera, and some people, there's things about the money was there, et cetera. You don't know what's happening on that end of it. But all of a sudden, the latest issue was the fact that the bridge was too low, and it couldn't accommodate. So where are we there on that piece?
I think it's interesting. Here's what's interesting. I'm a forensic accountant. I'm an expert. I do this kind of work all over the United States, right? And I'm bringing up major questions in terms of reporting, in terms of contracting issues, etc. You have other experts in their own right, whether they be economists or world-renowned architects, who have all come up with very major concerns. The most recent one is the United States Coast Guard saying you have rendered, or you're planning to build a bridge that's 95 feet in height. And that is not acceptable because, number one, our dredge equipment can't fit underneath that bridge, let alone, you know, the river traffic. And river traffic, it's my understanding, takes precedence. So it's very much up in the air because the United States Coast Guard, as of the last I heard, said we are not going to sign off or give our blessing on this project because,
but the public was told, yes, it was going to be built. I mean, we had the money, the bridges, the rendering had been accepted, the environment. So I'm just asking, what about the key consultant, if you will, David Evans? Should he not have made note of the fact that the Coast Guard said this about a year or so ago?
It would be interesting to understand why some of these things have happened. We had a bridge that they did a rendering of, that the independent study said we can't build that bridge. It's not physically possible. You know, there are some things here that have gone on. The $500 million, they are $500 million in a funding hole, meaning they think they're going to get a certain amount of money to pay for this, and other experts are saying, no, you're $500 million off. So there are some benchmarking things that seem to be lacking, and it doesn't make sense to most people why those sorts of things haven't been, let's say, called a timeout and fixed before we keep moving forward.
You know, I noticed that our state treasurer for Oregon, Ted Willett, had made the point, didn't he?
Yes, he did. In fact, he probably took his information from Joe Courtwright, who initially came up with that number.
And Joe Courtwright?
Joe Courtwright is a local economist here in Portland. And then Mr. Williams, I think is his name, the treasurer, Wheeler. Wheeler. He went out and got his own experts, 2 different experts for the state of Oregon to figure out what they thought was going to be, you know, the financing number for the project, and each of those experts evidently came to the same conclusion, that they were concerned that they are grossly underestimating the amount of money that they'll receive from tolling.
So, Tiffany, what about the public, the average public like us? We're the one that are basically funding the monies, okay?
Yes, you are.
Hopefully,
we all are.
We've elected officials, if you will, that are looking out for our interests. What do we do?
I think you've got to call your local legislators. A lot of them are coming on board or starting to understand this. And the more I travel to Salem or I travel up to Olympia, the more understanding they're gaining. They're the ones that are approving these budgets. They're the ones that are, you know, approving the appropriations. And they need to know that their constituents are worried about the way their money is being spent.
What about our congressional delegation? I mean, we're spending federal funds on this stuff here.
That's right.
I.e. federal taxes, right? Okay. We got a congressional delegation here. We got Senator Wyden. We've got I don't know the
Herrera Butler is in our.
We got a whole bunch of folks, if you will. Now, I would think they would also have to be a sort of a sign-off entity in this whole issue.
They're aware. I know that our Congresswoman from Southwest Washington, Jamie Herrera Butler, she is very much on top of this project. She's demanding that the people of Southwest Washington get a vote. So I know she's very aware.
Wow. Well, then, like I say, on the other side of the river, you would think that Congressman Blumenauer should be the responsible entity over this side of the deal, but you hear nothing about him. I mean, I really got a concern. I really have a concern about this MURGRAP. I want to know. If you can get that information,
I can get it.
We need to
it's
get
there.
That. We need to get that information. That can know when he got on consultant and whether or not he was working for the congressman at the same time. And I would invite the congressman to come on the show with the Oregon Voters Digest here and take on some responsibility, if you will. It's a very sensitive issue right now. The public's very irritated what they've seen, and thank goodness for the Oregonian in many ways, and thank goodness for you.
Well, thank you. I know that a lot of people are starting to understand what's going on.
Well, no,
it's important.
It's just begun, right?
I agree.
But we got to stop this money. So evidently, we got to get in touch with our, as you say, our legislative state.
It's so important. An email or a phone call, they listen.
Sounds good, Tiffany. Tiffany, look, we're going to stop at this point in time, but next week we're going to probably put on. We're going to get some folks who'll kind of give us a little up to date on the whole issue of the CRC. And while you're putting together that money piece, maybe you can come during that particular point in time too.
Be happy to anytime.
Right. Tiffany, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good information. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, folks. What we'll do, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with our second half of the show. Okay?
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Yes, I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Folks, I guess you can understand why we're going to be very interested in following up on the whole issue of the CRC, Columbia River Crossing, okay? Big time. I mean, it's fantastic. But anyway, what we're going to do this particular half hour is that we've got as our guest Hanna Cox, who's from the YouTube Education Forum. We've been doing a number of things about YouTube. So anyway, this is they basically got into, if you will, this particular issue, and the issue that I'll talk to you normally it's an issue that I tend to not want to be a part of. In fact, it's a women's issue. It's a woman's issue.
I don't think it's a woman's issue. No.
It sure isn't now. It sure isn't now. It's political. It's a male issue, but it's about women issue when you think about contraception, abortion, and things of that nature, and whatever, and then religion too. I mean, the whole nine yards. Okay, so we got Hanna here. We're gonna get right. Let's get right on into it, Hanna. I mean, the big thing that was out there right off the bat was when, in fact, I guess the President Obama had indicated the fact that religious organizations are going to have to provide, if you will, birth control pills and contraception, whatever, to employees as a result of the fact that they were receiving federal funds or something to that effect. Am I right or not?
It has nothing to do with whether or not they're receiving federal funds.
Okay.
So what the HHS mandate was that all
HHS
Health and Human Services,
right.
I think,
okay,
was that every employer that offered health insurance
okay,
in the nation would cover with no co-payments contraception and abortion-inducing drugs and sterilization.
right.
And that included religious employers. Mm-hmm. But it also came up because the Catholic Church is not simply insuring its employees, it's insuring students, it's insuring hospital workers, so that that was a mandate that basically meant that the church had to violate its own teachings in order to satisfy the government requirement. And so it was presented by the government as a woman's issues. But this has been going on for several years now under, to some extent, the Republican as well as the Democratic administration.
Okay, so it's not.
And this is only the last kind of peach in the peach bowl before it just kind of fell over. For the last many years, I think, religious organizations like the Salvation Army have been told that they cannot ask the people they employ to support, or at least not contradict, the mission statement of the Salvation Army, which is a mission statement that involves a religious commitment to the Salvation Army's doctrine of Christianity. Individual school groups that are running basically Christian fellowship groups cannot require in colleges that their leaders be Christian or subscribe to Christian fellowship. So non-Christians could come in and run for office, and there's no way that the group could say, look, we have been set up with a mission to advance a certain religious vision. And we don't think that if you are opposed to this vision, you should be a leader of this organization. That freedom to choose your leadership was, and to choose basically your ministers, your own ministers, was challenged. And a recent Supreme Court decision, 9-0, unanimously decided against the government's position. They said that the Lutherans in Hosanna Tabor case had a right to pick their own teachers and their own ministers on the basis of their religious convictions. That had nothing to do with the Catholics. Then another issue that came up 2 or 3 years ago in individual states, in Massachusetts, the Catholic Church social agencies placed 60% of the children for adoption. The government, irrespective of whether the church took money from the government, and I don't know whether they did, but this is totally irrespective of that, the government said you could not do abortions in Massachusetts unless you agreed to adopt children out to gay couples, even if you were willing, and the church was willing, to recommend to gay couples other agencies that would be eager to adopt out to gay couples. It was necessary for the church to adopt children out to gay couples. The church in Massachusetts said, we cannot do that. It's against our fundamental teachings. We'll have to go out of the adoption business. Mm-hmm. And the government of Massachusetts said, so go out of the adoption business. And they did. This has now happened in Chicago as well. I don't know what the church's decision there will be. And I know that in Portland, Oregon, the church some years ago went out of adoption. So this is not a particularly woman's issue. Okay, this is a religious... The question is, how far can the government, under the First Amendment freedom of conscience, force religious institutions to follow administrative decrees from the government?
Whether being allocated federal funds or not?
Right. This is totally independent in Illinois and Massachusetts, totally independent of whether or not the institution takes federal funds.
And you were saying in your introduction piece that this was debated not only in just this administration, but it's been debated for a number of years. When did this start?
I can't tell you when it started.
But it wasn't just this time around, last year or so.
It's basically, this country was built around the notion of toleration. Mm-hmm. The people that were fighting for religious toleration did not believe that all religions were good or that all religions were equal. They were religiously very dedicated dissenting Christians. Mm-hmm. They were the Baptists and the Quakers and the people that were not part of the establishment religion. What they believed and what they fought for was that all religions would be tolerated, provided only that those religions tolerated other religions, mm-hmm. and that those religions did not use force, violence, or fraud against anybody, even their own members. So as long as a religious group followed its what they called natural law or the second table, they would be tolerated in the colonies and eventually in the United States of America. This was foundational principle in 1640. It was foundational principle in 1776. They would be tolerated provided they followed the law of the land in basically big issues, and provided they renounced the use of force to enforce religious beliefs. And at first, almost every religious group fought this, because every religious group, as Roger Williams said, as long as they were...
And Roger was who?
Roger Williams was the founder of Religious Freedom in America and the founder of Rhode Island and one of the founding members of the Baptist community in America. He was exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the city on the hill, because he believed intensely in individual religious freedom and not coercing what he called the sacred marriage. For Roger Williams was between the individual and Christ. And anybody who forced an individual to change their religion was basically, this was a what he called the rape of the soul. So what he said is that the Puritans, well, they had come to America complaining about the lack of religious freedom in England. But as soon as they got in control of a city in America, they were all for theocracy. Any religion, any group of people, give them political control. You saw that on the Columbia River crossing. And they start to use it. So the trick is not to say this religion is dictatorial or that religion. Probably every group of people is dictatorial given the opportunity. The trick is to say well, in the words of one of the English ministers that said this, we cannot all be brethren, let us be friends. We are all together in a political community, but we are of different religions. And we have to tolerate the religious differences, even if, particularly if, we don't agree with the other people. That principle is essential to this nation. Toleration is not approval. Toleration is toleration. Now, there are a lot of people who don't agree with the Catholic position, let's say, on contraception or abortion. I don't agree. I'm not Catholic, and I don't necessarily agree with that position. But I strongly agree that they have a right to make those judgments. And that so long as something like contraception or abortion or adoption for gays is available in some other way, through some other institution, no one is really being harmed. That this is kind of like strict scrutiny in a racial discrimination case. All laws discriminate, but do they have to discriminate to achieve that good? If the good is the free access to contraception, then it can be achieved without the Catholics having to provide it. So this is not forcing women either to use contraception or not use contraception. This is forcing the Catholic Church to pay for it, in violation of their beliefs, and their beliefs are a couple thousand years old. It's the same with these other issues. What we are finding more and more is that there's no room for toleration among secularists. If you don't agree with their kind of faith in the things that they believe are the good, then you will not be tolerated anymore. And the Boy Scouts have found this. The list is endless.
You know, again, thinking about some of the points that you were making about, again, I think about the fact that it shouldn't be made, the latest issue with people are very familiar with, about the Catholics having, the churches having to pay. Now, its understanding is that, I guess there's another discussion now talking about the fact that the administration said they're trying to get the insurance companies to pay.
But the churches have to pay the insurance companies.
The churches have to pay the insurance companies. So that's where we are now.
And the churches are saying that's not, we're still paying.
You're still paying. Okay, so where are we now with this particular point, with this piece?
We are in a logjam.
Okay, and so how do we solve it?
I think, I don't know. I think as a nation we have to see whether the First Amendment means anything, and religious freedom means anything to us as a nation. If it does, then we have to tolerate people who disagree with the mainstream.
You think this will be another issue that the Supreme Court is going to have to take on, like they're taking on the health care issue?
Oh, yes.
So this will be a second issue.
They already took it on in the case of the government's deciding that the religious organization could not pick its own leadership. That was the middle of February, and in that decision, both the liberal and the conservative justices all agreed that the government had overstepped the boundaries set by the First Amendment.
They made that point.
9-0. And the definitive statement was made by, in fact, Elena Kagan, who was Obama's recent Supreme Court. She was just put on the Supreme Court, and Samuel Alito, who was a Bush appointee. But they wrote in that case, throughout our nation's history, religious bodies have been the preeminent example of private associations that have acted as critical buffers between the individual and the power of the state when civil law threatens. It is easy to forget the autonomy of religious groups, both here in the United States, that the autonomy of religious groups, both here in the United States and abroad, has often served as a shield against oppressive civil laws. If, in fact, that moral autonomy is denied religious groups, it will, and we're already seeing that, we will be systematically denied other individual rights. So that the government, I mean, I'm with You Choose, and we're doing this event on Thursday night, but,
right.
But the government is, the case of the little girl who came to school with her mother's packed lunch that was thrown away because it didn't fulfill the government requirements. And instead, you know that case.
No, share it with us.
A little girl in, I forget what state, I think it was Georgia, came to school with, she was 5 years old, with a bag that her mother had packed for lunch. And it contained a turkey and cheese sandwich, a little bag of potato chips, and some fruit, banana or something. And the government or health personnel used this little girl's lunch as an example of bad nutritional planning.
Okay.
And threw the lunch away and fed the little girl what the students were having, which was chicken nuggets. If you can't pack your kids' lunch, I mean, it's not as if it was junk food that was packed. It was a turkey sandwich with cheese. Now, you know, a Muslim or Jew is going to have a little objection to that combination, but the government now can tell you what you're going to eat in schools.
Well, you know, on that same issue, one of our major concerns across the country, everybody for that, was talking about the whole issue of obesity and those fast food industries that are just causing all sorts of havoc, placing pop machines in the schools and placing all kinds of trinkets, if you will, in those machines and whatever. And so what I'm hearing is the fact that we got to get this out of the school aspect of it. Would we put that same context in with the little girl bringing this lunch to?
No.
Okay.
Because first of all, if you're getting those machines out of the school, that is a legitimate government choice.
Okay.
But to take this little girl's lunch is to take something that her mother and her family took the responsibility of making for her. The government didn't provide it.
Well, I guess the point I was going to make, I'm basically kind of saying the same thing, in that what if she put the Burger King in a bag and some fries?
I think it's still the parents' decision.
Okay.
This is kind of the inverse. The government has the right to say, we will not provide that. Mm-hmm. But does the government have the right to say that you cannot eat it?
But now, what about the government getting on, let's say, one of the fast food chains and say, hey, look here, you got to consider some of the fat items, whatever.
The government is doing that. The government is taking control of the whole food chain from the farm level. The FDA is taking control of the production of food under the same sort of restrictions that they've taken control over the production of prescription drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's going to have a lot of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to put little farmers out of business, little processors out of business.
But we do agree that there are some issues in regards to what we eat, like the FDA. I noticed that this piece about ground meat, if you will, they were putting some kind of all sorts of things.
Pink slime in it.
Yeah, pink slime. And then all of a sudden, now they're telling the public, well, the only way you can know that you're going to get legitimate beef, 100% beef, is that you've got to go to your butcher or whomever's basically packaging the meat to basically pick up some round steak or whatever and have them ground that particular meat for you. Now,
but the pink slime thing came out in connection with school lunches. It's the school that was feeding the kids pink slime.
But did they know that they were feeding them pink slime?
I don't know what they knew or didn't know.
Jesus Christ! I mean, I won't eat any ground meat anymore myself.
I don't know what they knew or didn't know. If I go to the grocery store and buy beef, I know it's 100% beef and what percentage fat that is. That's on the label.
Yeah, but that's what they say. But now they're saying, what they're telling us, the public now, as I understand the article to say, is that you want to make sure that you get 100% beef. You better pick yourself a round steak that you visually see and give it to the guy and tell him to ground it up and then give it back to you in form of
well,
ground meat.
I think that if look, I
I'm just going.
If I went to Albertsons,
right,
and they said on a label this is 100% beef,
you believe them?
No, but if I found out it wasn't 100% beef, I'd have grounds for suing them.
But that's what they're saying now, that it isn't 100% beef.
Well, I don't know about that.
It's going to be interesting.
No, because basically I don't buy my meat from Albertsons, and I do exactly what you're describing.
Oh,
I know the source of my meat back to the cow.
Back and forth. Boy, that's very interesting. So the people on the Lillian, a lot of times they're having some issues. Well, look, before we get in, we got about 9 more minutes. I think we ought to make this announcement, get this announcement involved with you and Deborah Murray and the folks are really doing a lot of things out there and really getting things to the table for discussion.
So
you got an extra copy? I'm going to put this on the camera just in case.
Yes.
Do we happen to have it? We got it on camera. Okay, they're going to put it on the screen.
They're not going to put the announcement. But
okay, can't put it on the screen. Okay, so what I'll do then, I'm going to go on. They've got an announcement on the other part in terms of where to go and whatever. But Dom, why don't you see if you can put this? She's going to get that, and then you can just talk to that. Okay.
Okay, so the meeting on Thursday, which is going to be Thursday the 29th at 6:45 at the West End building on Cruise Way. The meeting on Thursday is to discuss the limits, or to ask the question, are there limits to government power and the free exercise of conscience? As are faith-based hospitals, schools, and shelters, are they facing either compromise on fundamental principles or closure? What does this mean for your church or synagogue or mosque or faith group? And what do the scriptures say about faith in the public square? I will speak briefly, and then Father Peter Smith of St. Rose of the Lima Catholic Church will speak and take questions from a Catholic perspective. And then a nationally known Alliance Defense Fund attorney, David Hacker, is flying in to speak to the legal implications. Most of the Alliance Defense Fund cases have been First Amendment liberty cases, but not Catholic.
Okay.
They may be Catholic, they may be Jewish, but my experience is that most of the ADF cases are Christian and Protestant. And he will go over the recent history of these decisions and the ways, and court cases, and the ways in which Christians are being restricted in their right, in the privacy of their homes and in the privacy of their churches, to practice their religion.
Ultimately, this debate's going to be, i.e., either in Congress up there, up in D.C. or something, or i.e. Supreme Court. Do you have, are there going to be any legislators, state legislators, or the congressional delegations like the...
I don't actually know. This U-Choose generally has some state legislators. We generally have 4 or 5.
But they are welcome, right? They are welcome.
Oh, yes.
Everyone's welcome.
Everybody's welcome, and the press is welcome. But the focus of these two, U-Choose generally provides its own speakers.
Right.
But David Hacker is a national speaker. And so and Father Smith is speaking for the Archdiocese of Portland.
That's local here, of Portland. Okay.
But it's still the Archdiocese. It's not a U-Choose organization.
Right.
And the Archdiocese, as you may know, the Catholic Church is a very, very big supporter of Obamacare. They have since 1919 been asking for universal health care.
And now it's here.
Yes.
But this is an issue, though.
But this is an issue for them. But it's not that they're Republicans who have suddenly are using this issue. They have been on the vanguard of support for Obamacare. So what we are focusing on here are these two speakers, but I'm sure that there will be other representatives there. This is just an issue that is already on its way to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so you basically gave them the address, et cetera, in regards to where and this discussion, I think it's a much needed discussion, and I take it it'll be open. It's open to the public, right?
Absolutely.
Across the board, right?
Yes, and after the speakers, U-Choose has this what we call U-Talk. Everybody is invited to, and a lot of people do, ask questions of the speakers, of each other. And very often the positions, there's no uniformity of positions. There's a lot of people, there are people who will attack the speakers. But that's what freedom of speech is about, and freedom of assembly.
Well, you know, what's good about this is the fact, you know, folks like yourself and Debbie and others who are part of You Choose are bringing issues, current issues, that are major concerns, if you will, to the public at large. And often the layperson doesn't have access to what's going on. They're not familiar with the congressional debates. And we're right in the midst of a political campaign, i.e. for president and the like and whatever, and the back and forth routine. And now it's on the table politically. It
is on the table.
As opposed to it being just an open kind of discussion. And so at the end of the day, it's going to better our way of living, even though we know we're in the 20th century, et cetera, et cetera. So this is good. And so we want to thank you again for You Choose putting this piece together. And I would encourage the viewing audience to consider attending. Okay. Again, that's Thursday, March 29th. And it's off West End Building of 4101 Cruz Way, Lake Oswego, Oregon. Again, we want to thank you again.
Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate that very much, Hannah. Always a pleasure. Okay. Again, hope you enjoyed the show and share it with your neighbors. And we're also on YouTube, too. Again, as George Page always said, back to what you believe in. Have a good evening.